Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I show you how I created this beautiful artwork here. I called it Monochrome Ocean. And I show you everything from carving it out of the solid wood to the painting of the finished piece. I was actually really happy how it turned out. And it developed a very nice texture and range of color. So don't talk around anymore, let's get started. First of all, of course, you need wood. For this project I choose oak, which is not the cheapest option, but is excellent to work with because of its short grain, which allows for clean and controlled carving. It's actually important that the wood is properly kiln right for indoor use, with a moisture content between 7 to 12%, which is commonly needed for all furniture for interior. I then glued these oak beams together to create one large solid block. At this stage, you already can see the rough shape that I carved using an angle grinder for creating the basic texture and the overall form of the waves. Then I actually really spent a lot of time experimenting and trying to find the best way to bring this all to life, how I imagined it. The biggest challenge was actually getting the waves to look like real water. I wanted them to feel very natural, not artificial or overly abstract, while the colors were always to be meant in a monochrome color range. I wanted the texture itself to be as realistic as possible. To achieve that, I tried a wide range of different tools and techniques till I ultimately ended up with this version here. Therefore, I used this small rotary carving bit with rounded heads, which worked extremely well. Compared to chisels and gouges, it gave me much better control when carving hardwood like oak. Those traditional tools simply didn't work very well for this project. They would probably be a better choice for softer woods. Here you can see the early stages of the carving process. I started with the front of the piece and gradually worked my way toward the back, shaping the waves section by section. What you can't see here is that I used a much smaller router bit for the front section, where the water is more turbulent there, with lots of movement and swirling, compared to the back, where it's much calmer and smoother. There it's better to use a router bit with a larger radius. And that's basically how I completed the first version. One thing I would recommend to anyone is to create a rough first pass, then go over the entire piece again. You can also experiment with different router bit sizes for specific areas. And as you keep refining it, you start to see how the piece envelopes and whether the waves actually look realistic or not. This lets you gradually work your way toward the result you are aiming for. After that, I centered the beach. And compared to the rest of the project, this part was fairly straightforward. And I had actually a good idea of how to represent the gentle sand dunes. And with the top surface finished, we were able to trim the piece on all sides, making it perfectly straight and square, and could go on to an actually really important part, which I also could have done before. But it was also fine after the carving. And yeah, it was to stabilize the whole piece, because it's made of 8 centimeters thick oak beams. And there is an insane amount of force generated when this wood moves. And that's why it's very important to stabilize it with sliding dovetail cleats, just like you would do with any massive table in your house, right? You can see here I routed out these grooves where I could insert the metal cleats that I fabricated and welded before, and then I screwed them into the wood using treated inserts. This way they have a much lighter hold than they would with normal wood screw, and they are replaceable. Plus, the pressure from the screws can be adjusted at any time. So the key here is simply not to over tighten them, so the wood can move easily and expand a little bit. So with that done, and knowing that the wood was fixed so far against wrapping, I could correct all the small imperfections, splits or cracks and flaws in the wood, which I needed to get rid of, because it's a living material. And you have to go over this anytime you work with solid beams. For that I used a normal 2-component wood filler, which I then sanded down afterward. And with that finished, everything was ready to paint. And I tell you, it really was so good, finally, to have all this stuff done and come to the part where you really see how it will turn out. So the first step was to paint the sides, which I did using a spray gun, and it actually turned out really well. And while they were drying, I made a test piece for the sea. After just one attempt, I quickly switched to use a brush, because it gave me far more flexibility with the paint and allowed me to blend the different shades and waves exactly the way I wanted. Since the surface wasn't perfectly smooth anyway, brush strokes were not visible. So I decided to use the spray gun only to paint all the black area, which is 2/3 of the water, and put it then aside to focus entirely on painting with a brush. This might not look like it, but it was actually a really satisfying process, almost like meditation, and I generally enjoyed it. During the first pass, I had to ease into it and get a feel for the paints, especially how the colors would change and how much lighter or darker they would look once they are dried. Overall, it turned out a little too dark for my liking. So I washed some of the paint off, went over it again, and made everything a bit brighter. Because you know how it is. If you are not 100% happy with something, you do it again. And if you are still not happy, you do it again and again and again until you are. In the end, it was absolutely the right call, and I was really happy with the final result. Once everything had dried, I masked off the painted waves and tried spraying the beach with the spray gun. But again, it didn't really give me the result I was looking for, so after a short time, I decided to paint that with the brush as well. The brush strokes actually worked really well for the beach, creating subtle streaks and textures that gave it a much more natural and convincing look. After that, I sealed the entire surface with a clear coat to protect it from environmental influences and damage, and that part was finished so far. After that, I sealed the entire surface with a clear coat to protect it from environmental influences and damage, and that part was finished so far. I also made a small adjustment with the waves. On the back edges of the wave crests, I carefully removed a little of the paint using thinner, allowing the natural wood to show through. I thought it was a great way to represent the glossy highlights of the waves by letting the wood itself become part of the final look. And then came the last step, creating the form and the sea spray on the waves. For this I used again my 2-component wood filler, which is bright white and which I had ordered specifically for this part of the project. To be honest, this was the step I had been most nervous about from the very beginning, because unlike the paint, there was no real opportunity to make corrections afterward. If I made a mistake here, it would have been very difficult to fix. So I took my time and worked as carefully as possible. I mixed the filler in small batches and only worked on one small section at a time, gradually making my way across the entire piece. Thankfully everything went smoothly and I was really happy with how it turned out. Actually, exactly how I imagined it when I had the idea. Yeah, and then I took a friend and went out to take some nice photos and shot a few videos of the finished piece. Here I'd like to give a special thanks to the St. Kilian Church for allowing me to use the location. It's a really interesting building and I regret I don't have more material of the inside. The lightning also completed the artwork perfectly and really brought it to life. So once again, a big thank you to the parish for making this possible. They were incredibly welcoming and everything was handled so easily. And that's it. My artwork and its making of. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would really appreciate your support by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Also check out my website, which I'll link below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.